Diablo 4's open beta and eventual launch is right around the corner, and that means making one of the most challenging decisions in any RPG: which class to play. My name is Codiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and today we're here to help you make that all-important choice in Diablo 4. So as you may or may not know, Diablo 4 will launch on June 6 with 5 classes, and the lineup is almost identical to that of Diablo 2 all those years ago. The Barbarian, the Rogue, the Sorcerer, the Druid, and the Necromancer. Each class brings something different to the table, but before we go any deeper, I think we need to understand each class from a 30,000-foot perspective. The Barbarian is a frontline melee warrior. If you've played any previous Diablo game, then the moveset will look familiar, with a variety of powerful melee-based abilities that lean heavy into bleed damage. One of the classes that's still shrouded in a bit of mystery is the Rogue. As you might expect, this is a class that emphasizes subterfuge and agility to deal damage to enemies. There is a healthy mix of both melee and ranged attacks on the table, and this is one of those classes that could flex either way, depending on your playstyle. The third class, the Sorcerer, is a magic-wielding class that channels the power of the elements, namely fire, frost, and lightning, to deadly effect. This is your typical glass cannon dishing out high damage, but with very little in the ways of protection. Making its triumphant return is the Druid, the class I'm most excited to check out. Channeling the power of physical, poison, and lightning damage, the Druid is a hybrid class that can be built in a number of different ways, filling out the role of a frontline warrior or ranged caster. Finally, one of the most beloved classes in all of Diablo, the Necromancer, is back, not locked behind DLC. Tapping into bone, darkness, blood, and the army, the class is incredibly flexible. Whether you prefer to play as a scythe-wielding melee necro, or you choose to let others do the fighting for you, there are a number of playstyles you can explore with this class. Now, while each class already looks and feels different, the development team took this a step further and is introducing something called unique class mechanics. These are class-exclusive systems designed to help differentiate the playstyle of each of the 5 classes. It was designed to offer players more ways to dive deep into a class fantasy while still being moderately accessible. We'll speak to each of these as we highlight each of the classes in depth. Now, hopefully this quick overview gives you a sense for what each class brings to the table, but we do need to go much deeper if we hope to understand what separates each class and makes them unique. When you think Barbarian, you think frontline, and that's pretty much spot on. This class has long been the brutal physical damage dealer, ready to take on any number of enemies with overwhelming force. There are certain advantages to this playstyle that some of you may be drawn to. It's no shocker, but you're going to deal a massive amount of damage both from your core skills and with the addition of any berserking buff. Despite the concept of a large fighter, you're actually quite nimble with several quick movement skills, and to round off the list, you're just a tank that can take a ton of abuse. Now, on the flip side, you're going to be highly dependent on Fury to deal most of the big damage. This is your primary resource you build up with your basic skills. The class also suffers from long cooldowns on many of the core abilities. This creates an interesting dynamic where players will need to keep one eye on Fury and the other on active cooldowns, anticipating what they'll need in the near future so that those big attacks can keep coming without a significant drop in DPS. As a Barbarian, your primary damage type is physical, and you'll wield any combination of 1- or 2-handed slashing weapons, 1- or 2-handed bludgeoning weapons, and 2-handed weapons. Now, speaking of weapons, this is where the unique class mechanic comes into play, the arsenal system. The Barbarian is able to equip 4 different weapons at once to fully utilize their skill loadout based on that skill's weapon requirements. Skills utilize one of 4 weapon slots: 2-handed bludgeoning, 2-handed slashing, a main hand, and an offhand. Depending on the requirement, the Barbarian will automatically swap between them depending on the skill being used. This really opens up options and allows players to use the whole breadth of the Barbarian's skills. You can even level up these weapons simply by playing. As you defeat your foes, each weapon gains XP appropriate to its use. There will be more depth to this system, especially when it comes to weapon enhancements, but that's just not something we have a ton of info on just yet, and we're not in the business of speculating. Next, let's talk skills. I'm not going to go into a full showcase of every ability for every class, but I do want to talk through the high-level function of each skill grouping and where that fits into each of the class's overall kits. Basic skills are just that, basic. These are the Barbarian's physical, but not so high damage dealers. They're your key to building up Fury to later spend on other skills. bash your enemy with a weapon, unleash a rapid flurry of blows with frenzy, or simply lunge forward and strike your enemy. Fury skills are also physical damage dealers that hit much harder and cost Fury to use. Slam your hammer down for a power AoE, cleave your enemies while inflicting bleed, spin to win with Whirlwind, double swing dealing huge damage, and launch a series of devastating uppercuts with your weapons. This is where a majority of your damage comes from and the bulk of your Fury is spent. Even though you're tanky, you're not invincible, which is where your defensive skills come in. These are cooldown-based abilities that crowd control enemies with the ground stomp, give your character Iron Skin, reduce damage with Challenging Shout, or buff your allies with a Rallying Cry. At the same time, some of these can even help with Fury generation and can impact how you weave in basic and Fury skills throughout battle. Brawling skills are the next grouping and are really a mixed bag of tricks, mainly for utility. You can use War Cry to buff yourself and your allies, Kick to knock back and stun enemies, Charge to rush forward in an unstoppable force, or Leap forward and slam down on enemies. All of these are single-use abilities with cooldowns and won't help you regain any Fury as unmodified abilities. Next up is Weapon Mastery, focusing on weapon-based skill movements. These are, again, cooldown-based abilities. Something like Death Blow seeks to kill an enemy and, if successful, resets a cooldown. Rupture applies a bleed to skewered enemies, and Steel Grasp throws out chains and pulls enemies in. Finally, we have the class Ultimates, which are high cooldown but super powerful skills. Call 3 Ancients to aid you in battle, all of whom do different things to your enemies. Or perhaps Iron Maelstrom, which uses your full arsenal of weapons, frantically attacking and slashing enemies multiple times. Or go nuts with Wrath of the Berserker to become unstoppable for a short period of time. Hopefully it's clear, you don't mess with a Barbarian, and after decades of tweaking and refining this class, I think it's safe to say the Diablo 4 version of the Barbarian has all the potential in the world to be one of the most dynamic melee classes in an ARPG to date. Making its comeback from the original Diablo game is the Rogue. This is a really exciting class as it leans into both a ranged and melee playstyle. You'll be able to change things up on the fly and combo various skills to best take down enemies. The class touts high damage output, fast moment-to-moment action and movement, high bleed potential, and overall versatility, which comes from its extensive ranged and melee skill set. Where the Rogue may run into trouble, as you might expect, is on the defensive side of things. They're just not heavily armored, which means if you get hit, you're going to feel the impact. Rogues will need to rely heavily on positioning to take down foes, and that often comes with a steeper learning curve. While many of the Rogue skills deal physical damage, Cold, Poison, and Shadow are also part of the kit, and by tapping into one-handed swords, daggers, bows, and crossbows, the Rogue will have a plethora of ways to deal out damage. So what sets the Rogue apart from the rest of the classes? Well, of course, the unique class mechanic called Class Specialization, which allows the player to fluidly swap between 3 different modes which provide a variety of playstyle enhancements. The first specialization is Combo Points. In this spec, basic skills will generate combo points, which can then be consumed for additional skill effects. You can earn up to 3 at any time and choose how to spend them and which skills they augment as you battle. For example, you can choose to spend 1 point on a skill to slightly enhance its damage or effect, or perhaps use all 3 points and really bump up that skill's power or buff potential. The second specialization is Inner Sight. When attacking enemies, one will be marked with a purple icon. Kill that target quickly and fill up your Inner Sight gauge. When the gauge is full, you gain unlimited energy for 4 seconds, allowing you to tap into your bag of tricks to unleash a barrage of damage. The final specialization is called Preparation. Unfortunately, at the time of making this video ahead of the open beta, we don't have any tangible information regarding how this will impact the Rogue's gameplay. Now, shifting gears, let's take a look at the Rogue's skill groups. First up are basic skills. These are weaker attacks primarily used to build energy and/or combo points. You'll see these manifest in ways such as throwing blades, firing arrows, a simple melee strike, or a quick stab with your knife. Core skills are the primary damage dealer or spenders, and this is where some of the most consistent high damage comes from. You'll be spending most of your energy here, and these skills can also be amplified by your combo points while in that specialization. These tend to be a bit more AoE-based skills, such as unleashing a barrage of regular or fire arrows, piercing shots through enemies, or a quick succession of furious stabs and slashes. Agility skills manifest as high mobility options for the Rogue. Move through the shadows with Shadow Step, leap backwards, throwing caltrops on the ground, or dash forward for a quick engagement or getaway. These will really bring the Rogue's mobility to life. Subterfuge skills are more utility based on the situation. The rogue fantasy really comes to life here by allowing you to vanish from sight in the shadows, or use a smoke grenade for a dynamic getaway, conceal yourself via stealth, or perhaps you'd prefer to lay down poison traps and tempt your enemy to follow you to their undoing. The Imbue skill family allows you to infuse your next 2 attacks with an added effect. Be it poison, shadow, or cold, you can add these effects for that extra 1-2 punch needed to take down an enemy. Finally, your high cooldown but destructive ultimate skills bring things home. Rain down arrows over a huge area twice, or if you prefer, create a shadow of yourself that mimics your actions for a period of time. Or you could just lay down a super deadly trap to snare and damage all enemies in an area, and of course, that choice is yours. The Sorcerer. Ah yes, wielder of the elements. What would a Diablo game be without a token mage-style range damage dealer? You may be familiar with a Sorcerer or something similar from other ARPGs, but it's hard to argue Diablo got it right all those years ago when it introduced the class in Diablo 1. That being said, what can you expect in Diablo 4? Massive AoE damage all the time, a huge array of crowd control options to control the battlefield, decent survivability with defensive abilities, and a surprising ability to move around an area in the heat of battle. However, all this damage and mobility comes at a price. The class is highly mana dependent, and if you run out, you can't do squat. You'll also find that if enemies put pressure on the Sorcerer and get in close, there's only so much the player can do to survive that onslaught, and sadly, the Sorc just doesn't really bring a whole lot to the table in terms of buffs or team modifiers. But if conjuring spells empowered by the elements is your thing, this is your class. You'll primarily be dealing cold, fire, or lightning damage, all while outfitting yourself with daggers, wands, staves, and focuses. Like the other classes, the Sorcerer can tap into their own unique class mechanic, dubbed enchantment slots. These slots allow you to take various skills and slot them as passives, providing an alternative benefit. Depending on how you build out your character will dictate which abilities you want to enchant. There is one restriction with this system. Players can't slot ultimate skills. In addition, any upgrades to that skill are also now passive. The good news is you can swap these out at any time, which makes for a very customizable system. The Sorcerer's basic abilities are low damage and more or less used to apply debuffs or help reset cooldowns of other skills. These are common attacks such as Frostbolt, Firebolt, Arc Lash, and Spark. Core skills are your damage dealers, but are also extremely mana thirsty. This is where you're going to run into mana issues if you're not careful about what you put onto your bars. Send out a frozen orb and chill your enemies, and combo that up with ice shards to deal even more damage. Or maybe you prefer to hurl a giant fireball or channel a beam of fire to crisp up the field. Your survivability really comes down to the next skill group. Defensive skills will aid you with shields and movement such as a flame shield or ice armor, but sometimes you just need to get out of a tight corner, which is where teleport comes in. If any enemy does get too close, you can always Frost Nova for an instant but short freeze duration to reposition and give yourself a fighting chance. Your conjuration skills will summon elementals to aid you in combat. Call upon a pair of ice blades to slash enemies with cold damage, summon a 3-headed hydra that spits fire at your foes, or conjure a spear of lightning that seeks out enemies for multiple hits. You'll master your elemental powers with the mastery skills. These are your massive AoE damage dealers: Blizzard, Meteor, Firewall, and Ball Lightning. These all perform exactly as you'd expect and do it extremely well. Finally, your ultimate skills finish the job and make sure nobody escapes alive. Deep freeze yourself in ice and explode to damage everything around you. Ignite in a pulsing inferno, or double down on lightning spells with unstable currents and bring the heavens crashing down on your foes. A master of nature, the Druid makes its triumphant return to Diablo and brings with it an impressive array of skills and battlefield benefits. The class has access to a good amount of CC and can also debuff the enemy while still boasting a decently high damage output. There are a few more ranged options than, say, the Barbarian, but where the Druid really shines is in its close quarters combat, tapping into its incredible ability to fluidly shapeshift. You're also dependent on the Spirit resource, which will need to be managed accordingly. Again, slot too many of the wrong abilities, and you'll be left unable to call the power of nature to aid you in combat. The real treat to this class is the pure fantasy element. Druids are shapeshifters, and various abilities will require a certain form to enact. Fortunately, your abilities will automatically shift you to the proper form to deal their damage. This is a nice change as it removes a layer of management to keep track of while still keeping the fantasy of the Druid intact. You'll dish out damage via physical, lightning, and poison, and do so wielding 1- and 2-handed weapons in addition to staves. While we don't have a name for the Druid's unique class mechanic, we know how it'll work. As the Druid, you'll interact with up to 4 spirits that accept boons you receive from enemies. When applied, these boons unlock bonuses for the player and aid in various scenarios and combat options, enhancing your skills or providing buffs. You can only be aligned with one spirit, but you can freely switch between them as your situation warrants. At some point, you'll be able to unlock a 5th spirit, but this is still a mystery yet to be unveiled by the team. Checking out skills, starting with our basic category. These are, again, low damage dealers and ways to build up your spirit resource. Skills in this group will utilize physical and earth damage, such as Earth Spike, Shred, Stork Strike, or Maul. Spirit skills are your primary damage dealers that utilize the spirit resource. Shapeshift into a werebear and pulverize your targets. Crush enemies between pillars of earth, or conjure a swirling vortex to sweep enemies away. In the defensive group, we have your typical buffs that enhance armor, as well as a number of CCs. Tap into wind or earth protection, trample your enemies to momentarily stun them, apply attack speed debuffs with roar, or rend your enemies with a ravenous bite in werewolf form. Wrath skills are larger AoE abilities with longer but reasonable cooldowns. So far, we know of just 2 abilities in this category, be it blasting a group of enemies with hurricane force winds, or hurling a boulder crushing anything in its way. There are also companion skills, which take the form of passive summons. Depending on the skill chosen, wolves, ravens, or vine creepers will appear and aid you in combat. Wolves bring critical strike, ravens will add a vulnerability debuff, and vines will unleash poison to slowly whittle down your targets. Finally are the ultimate skills. Unleash your true druidic rage with a cataclysm storm to knock back enemies and deal huge amounts of damage. Rage in grizzly form to become an unstoppable force for a small period of time, or gain instant control of the battlefield by petrifying and damaging all nearby enemies. The final class making its reappearance is the Necromancer, best known for their command over the dead. Now, the Necro isn't for the faint of heart, but those willing to tackle the high skill ceiling will find it strong in several areas. You'll have plenty of summons available to you to do your bidding to aid you in combat. The Necromancer's deep level of flexible customization will also allow you to tailor your experience for both ranged and close quarters. And with a variety of vampiric options available to players, your sustain will be high if played correctly. Long story short, this is going to be a Theory Crafter's dream class. The class will deal physical and shadow damage as its source of mayhem, and will run the battlefield using one-handed swords, daggers, wands, focuses, shields, and one- and two-handed scythes. The Necromancer's unique class mechanic is appropriately dubbed Book of the Dead. This allows customization of your undead army comprised of skeletal warriors, skeletal mages, and golems. Each summon has one of 3 specializations to choose from that can boost single target or AoE damage, apply buffs, or manage crowd control. Once summoned, you have the option to sacrifice one, some, or all of these creatures to apply long-standing buffs to yourself to further modify your own abilities. There is a whole slew of potential here, and my head is already spinning thinking about all of the potential builds. Now, just like the other classes, your basic skills exist to fill minor damage gaps, but primarily serve to build up your class's resource, Essence. Hurl bone splinters at your foes, or tear the flesh off them with Decompose to form a usable corpse to aid you. Core abilities heavily utilize Essence, but here we start to tap into health regeneration through blood skills should you need to top off your health. You'll focus enemies with single target abilities that begin to seep to those around them or leave trails of blight that deal damage over time. Next, we'll use Macabre skills as our high damage dealers, but with medium cooldowns. Siphon health from enemies around you, imprison mobs with Bone Prison, or you can choose to detonate one of your corpses, dealing high AoE damage to anything in the vicinity. Corruption skills lay down some serious ground effects to damage enemies through curses. These will rely on Essence to cast and have a short duration, but if positioned correctly, can apply some damage and slow debuffs on your targets. Thus far, we only have 2 summoning skills. These aren't controllable summons, but will automatically act depending on the skill's use. Bone Spirit will use up all of your remaining essence, and depending on how much essence you put into the spell, determines how much damage is dealt. Corpse Tendrils, on the other hand, will use one of your corpses to pull in and stun enemies around it. Finally, for our ultimate skills, we seek to deal massive damage, but it comes at the cost of high cooldowns. Send your enemies running from a blood wave, catch them in your swirling bone axe, or summon the army of the dead to hunt down and explode on your enemies. So there you have it, a closer look into each of the 5 classes in Diablo 4. Obviously, we are still a bit away from launch and things could change, and there is still plenty we don't officially know yet, but hopefully now you have a clear understanding of which class you might want to check out first. This is just the beginning of our Diablo 4 coverage. We know you guys come to check out the channel for all sorts of games, but if Diablo is on your radar and you want more content like this, including deeper guides and eventually some fun builds, hit that like button and consider subscribing. We also plan on opening up a Diablo 4 clan once the game goes live on June 6, so if that's something you're interested in, consider joining the Legacy Gaming community on Discord. We recently reworked our entire server, so come hang out, win free prizes, talk about games like Diablo 4, and eventually group up with your fellow clanmates. Check out the link below to learn more. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.